Well, that sucked. I put Kevin through the worst game I could think of and it still didn't faze him. Or was it the worst? Perfect. Ichigo, I'm home. You find anything else for me to review?
僕の仕事ですか?
Yeah, I really should tell you these things. Hey Ichigo, is Man of Steel out yet?
Hi.
Perfect. Hi, welcome to the SDP. I'm Kevin, the happy hipster.
僕はイチゴ、アニメの京都ホストだ.
So, my fellow viewer.
君は視聴者たちを意味しますか?
No. So in honor of the latest Superman film reboot, let's take a look at Injustice, Gods Among Us, the spiritual successor to Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe, in which NetherRealms has crafted another versus fighter featuring a stable of superheroes and villains, such as Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, the Joker, and I have not played it. Yeah, I'm actually going to review the Superman game for Nintendo 64.
まさか.
You're right, I'm not reviewing Superman.
そうでか?
Yeah, its real title is The New Superman Adventures. Really? There's a typo on the back of the box?
残りフランス語ですね.
Right, because it was made by a French team. Well, in case you don't know already, Superman 64, or whatever you want to call it, has frequently been cited as one of the worst, if not the worst, video game of all time. Well, not the worst. But what could the game have possibly done to warrant such widespread disapproval? It's a long list, trust me, but when I was a kid renting this when it came out, I couldn't pick out a fraction of the problems I'm about to list at the end of this review. In fact, I kind of remember liking it. But how much my memories are true and how much have been distorted by time, maturity, and antidepressants? Find out after this. I'm sure you need no introduction to Superman, but I'll do it anyway because that's how I roll.
Created by writer Jerry Siegel and artist Joe Shuster in 1938, Superman is comic books' Man of Steel, and not in that phony baloney Joseph Stalin kind of way, and defender of the city metropolis. What his stories tend to lack in introspection, they make up for in scale, as Superman can do pretty much everything. He's got almost every superpower one could wish for. Flying, super strength, super speed, X-ray vision, you get the idea. And his only weakness is radiation from the mineral kryptonite. Between the many different comic series, TV shows, and movies, the Superman franchise has gone through too many iterations than I'd care to count. The universe presented in this game was based off of Superman the Animated Series, the hit show which ran on TV prior to the game's release in 1999. As for the game's plot, recurring villain Lex Luthor has trapped Superman and some of his friends in a virtual recreation of Metropolis.
What could possibly go wrong? If you don't know of this game's most publicized problem by now, I'll stop beating around the bush. You have to fly through rings. You have to fly through more rings than the Sonic equivalent of New Super Mario Bros. 2. These rings are to Superman what falling into pits is to the Atari ET game, both unloved gimmicks and famously bad games, but hear me out so I can explain how this works.
The levels in this game alternate between ride stages, where Superman flies to different points in virtual Metropolis to perform miscellaneous heroic deeds, and action stages taking place within one location. To get from place to place in the ride stages, you have to fly through a chain of rings. In order to force you on track, skipping too far ahead means you have to start that particular passage over again. However, at all times there's a safe zone of up to 3 rings ahead of the next one. Should you miss any rings, you can take the time to go back and pass through the first one, or just go to the next ring in the buffer. Taken on its own, it is an annoying, time-wasting, and unnecessary mechanic, I will admit. Still, I've heard the horror stories about a ring segment with a time limit of 10 minutes. Oh, I forgot to mention, there's a time limit. But believe it or not, I've never had any close calls with the clock. I, for one, usually need only half the time I'm given. Maybe that's just me. Despite all that, get this. The ring sections become even worse when you consider how bad the controls are. The high sensitivity of the control stick, the, quote, tank control scheme, unquote, and the lazy camera make it hard to turn at high speeds. And since the frame rate tends to fluctuate, if it decides to run at optimal speed when you're about to make a turn, you'll have even less control. Weird, when the game runs at its worst, it plays at its best. And it chugs at the slightest provocation despite the lack of graphical detail and the thick fog surrounding you even in the indoor areas. You'll have an easier time flying if you just let go of the accelerator or even brake every once in a while. That's right, it's like Gran Turismo as a flying man. I mean, you wouldn't take turns in Gran Turismo at full throttle, would you? I mean, maybe if you were a paid tester, but not if you're playing to win. What they also don't tell you is that if you switch the difficulty to the easy setting, the rings are gone completely. You just follow the compass to your next destination. While this does remove a major annoyance, the lack of challenge could make the game more boring, so pick your poison.
And even worse, unless you select the hard mode, the game ends before the final level. Way to railroad us into using an unlikable mechanic. Color me offended.
Mate, Kevin-kun. Angry video game nerd wa kono game o minaoshi shimasu ka?
He did. Hang on, I'll go ask him. Superman on Nintendo 64.
I will try.
Is it okay if I know you did an episode a while back, is it okay if I do my own take on it?
Oh, of course.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, cool.
Nice to meet you.
There you go.
It's okay, he gave me the green light.
Kimi wa Angry video game nerd ni ippatsu shitsumono suru gamecon ni unten shimasu ka?
Yes.
So de ka?
I'm a bad liar. Now, as I recall, the nerd threw his copy of Superman into the sun. You know, like the nukes in Superman 4. A fitting punishment, to be sure. But I don't feel guilty in presenting my own review because he gave up during the first ride stage without seeing all the game has to offer.
Seminai de ya?
Right. With all the attention gamers and the nerd have given to the ride stages, they seem to forget there's more to the game than that.
Action stages occur after each ride stage and have Superman do his thing within a certain location. A dam, a warehouse, the LexCorp office building, etc. Although the enemies are primarily just black shadows and drone bots, along the way you'll encounter villains from the comic and show. So if names like Mara, Brainiac, and of course Lex Luthor sound familiar, more power to you. In these levels, you have to complete a sequence of objectives, and you get to use a bunch of Superman's other powers to complete some of these goals. Apart from your standard flight and strength, abilities like heat vision, ice breath, super speed, and this mind control thing called Wait Programmation. Again, the manual didn't even translate that name from French. Are meter limited and recharged by collecting tokens. Keeping the source material in mind, you may cry foul at these limitations, but I'll personally accept that as a challenge, not that you use these powers much anyway. Unfortunately, the objectives are so unintuitively placed that you'll be backtracking every which way to find them. The fact that many of these levels are rather large, with many places that stand out, does not help matters, nor do the unspecific descriptions of your objectives. The third action stage, the warehouse, is where the game starts to show its true colors. There are doorways placed all around the main room, but they're blocked by lasers until you find the key or switch that turns one of them off. Like this one, since the room's so dark and foggy, how would you know to look for it up there? And then there's this. I just rescued Lois Lane and now I'm escorting her out, when guess what? She slows down and I have to go ahead and hunt down black shadows to protect her. But I can't go too far or else either she'll stop or another black shadow will gang up on her from nowhere. So now I have to wait for her to leisurely make her way across the room until she finally reaches the end when guess what? Now she picks up the pace. Seriously? Were you pranking on me, Lois? Were you yanking my crank? Having had my crank yanked by both the ride and action stages, I can't exactly decide which is worse, so again, pick your poison. Or don't pick at all.
After having come back to this game after all these years, I can say without fear of making myself a liar that it is bad. In fact, it's so bad that a port of the PlayStation was planned only to get cancelled once the scathing reviews rolled in. I know that feel. Whether or not this would have presented a chance to right some of its wrongs, we'll never know. But the fact remains that in the version we're stuck with, the character models are goofy looking and poorly animated. Vision limiting fog is prevalent everywhere despite the lack of graphical detail. Nearly every gameplay mechanic makes little to no sense. The controls provide you with all the grace of a legless mammoth. Your mission goals are unclearly described. The physics model is parsecs beyond unpolished, and it's buggier than a knight in Chincoteague. I've fallen through numerous platforms, accidentally failed and completed missions, left the playing field entirely, and I think once the game falsely thought my controller pack was corrupted. Oh, and that plot about Superman being trapped in a virtual world? It must have been a last-minute addition, having been brought on by the license holders who didn't want any real violence since, spoiler alert, it never gets resolved. Even if you beat the game, Superman never gets out of the virtual world to bring the real Lex Luthor to justice. Even if you win, you lose. What a fitting metaphor for the game itself.
Having said all that, I still managed to glean some occasional bounce of playability from this title, so I wouldn't call it a total loss. After all, I still maintain that I've seen and even played worse games than this. But if you think you can get as much fun as I did from playing Superman, you'll need much more luck than I. The worst video game of all time? I can't admit that in all honesty, it's a big market. But the worst video game on the Nintendo 64? Now there's a bet I'd make. Superman scores 20%, an F.
This is Kevin, with Ichigo, and you are the Resistance. I don't always ask for subscribers, but when I do it faster than a speeding bullet. Stay thirsty, my friends.